Alexander Hamilton has messed up. He kept his sins hidden for a while, but now it's all going to come out. He had a year-long affair with a married woman. His mistress's husband found out and has been blackmailing Hamilton for going on 5 years. A journalist and members of Congress are starting to ask questions, implying that Hamilton engaged in corruption while he was Secretary of the Treasury. Hamilton decides to come clean. He writes a pamphlet confessing the affair and the blackmail, defending himself against the corruption allegations. His reputation is going to be toast anyway. By confessing, he may eventually have a chance to regain public trust and serve in government again. But it's not just public trust that Hamilton has damaged. His wife Eliza is humiliated and furious. She is so angry with Hamilton that she leaves him in New York City and travels to her father's house in Albany, 150 miles away in a carriage over bumpy dirt roads while she's 8.5 months pregnant. Forget whether the country will forgive Hamilton. Will Eliza forgive him? She does, enough for them to have another child together. But again, Hamilton's hot-headedness, the insults he flings at his colleagues and rivals, his history of defending his honor in duels catches up with his family. Their oldest son, Philip, hears a classmate disparage Alexander. Philip and the classmate get into an argument. Philip challenges the classmate to a duel, like Alexander would do, and Philip is shot and killed. Eliza holds Alexander responsible for Philip's death. The gulf between them seems uncrossable. Lin-Manuel Miranda shows them trying to live with the unimaginable. The Hamiltons move uptown. Alexander goes for long walks around New York. He takes the children to church. He keeps trying to reach Eliza across the wreckage he has made of their family. Finally, at the end of the song, Eliza takes Alexander's hand and says, "It's quiet uptown." The chorus sings, "Forgiveness, can you imagine?" And the grace of the moment makes you cry. But was forgiveness really that simple? Peter says to Jesus, "Lord, if another member of the church sins against me, how often should I forgive? 7 times?" Jesus says to him, "Not 7 times, but I tell you 77 times." That's Matthew's version. In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus says 7 times 70 times, 490 times. This has got to be one of the most misused verses in the Bible. Too often, Christians assume forgiveness means erasure of sin. No matter what a sinner has done, no matter how many times they have done it, we have to forgive them. That has often meant no consequences for sin, no accountability, no amends made to victims, no protection of the vulnerable. Exhibit A for this is the Roman Catholic Church's handling of abusive priests. Lest we get complacent and think Protestants don't have that problem, some Episcopal bishops in the past did shuffle known abusers from parish to parish. We learned our lesson the hard way. Our sister denomination, the Church of England, is now struggling with a major abuse crisis of its own. Bishops of all 3 churches pointed to Jesus' teaching about forgiveness to justify their leniency towards abusers. But forgiving sins by pretending they didn't happen has left thousands of shattered lives and trust in organized religion at all-time lows. And it doesn't do sinners any favors to allow them to commit the same sin again. Nobody is helping them change. Erasing sins has terrible consequences for everyone. That can't be what Jesus meant. So what is forgiveness then? I want to suggest this definition. Forgiveness is letting go of the past so that a different future becomes possible. Forgiveness is done by the person sinned against for their own benefit. It is not primarily about the sinner. Forgiveness can lead to repairing the relationship broken by sin, but it doesn't always, and sometimes it shouldn't. And because forgiveness is about changing the future, it involves consequences and accountability for the sinner, so that they don't repeat the sins of the past. Forgiveness frees us all, sinner and sinned against, to live new lives. Barbara Crafton, a priest who writes and teaches about forgiveness, observes that forgiving someone is a conscious decision we make. When someone has sinned against us, when they've really wounded us, it hurts. We may be humiliated, angry, in pain. It's unlikely that we will feel a great rush of warm feelings for this person. Fortunately, Crafton says we don't have to feel warm and fuzzy to forgive. She says we begin to forgive by deciding. She means deciding to change the future, deciding to imagine a future for ourselves that isn't defined by the hurt we have suffered, deciding to heal for our own sake. This is not easy. Sometimes the decision to forgive requires the help of a therapist or a spiritual director. But deciding to forgive is necessary if we are ever going to be free of the wrong that was done to us. My spiritual director says that when we don't forgive, we are both the prisoner and the jailer. Maybe you've known people who are so stuck in what their parents or their ex or their boss did that they can't move past it. They've chosen not to forgive, and they're the one who's suffering for it. They can free themselves by making that decision to forgive. Barbara Crafton also points out that there are gradations of sin, from the petty little stuff to really grievous wounds. Forgiving a driver who cuts us off might take a few seconds. Forgiving a deep wound takes time, perhaps years, and it takes the work of God. We can't do it on our own. It's too much for us. This parable Jesus tells illustrates that. 10,000 talents is an unbelievable sum of money. It's the gross national product of a small country. The slave cannot hope to repay it. It takes the king, who's a stand-in for God, to forgive the debt. This parable puts forgiveness in the range of the uncountable. It's beyond our ability to keep track, beyond our ability to do by ourselves. But with God, all things are possible. God's compassion and mercy make it possible for us to forgive. And to forgive not 7 times, but 77 times, or 7 times 70 times. Forgiveness of deep wounds isn't something we do just once and then we're done with it. We may need to do it over and over again for years. I think this is what Jesus is talking about. Not letting a sinner continue in their sin, but the long, slow process of forgiveness. Alexander Hamilton confessed his affair in 1797. Philip Hamilton died in 1801, Alexander in 1804, Eliza not until 1854. I cannot imagine that taking Alexander's hand was the last and only time in Eliza's long life that she had to forgive him for the affair and Philip's death. Every time she thought about Philip, every time she remembered that trip to Albany 8 months pregnant, every time she and Alexander argued, she had to forgive him again. She had to choose a future that was different from the past. 77 times, 490 times, 10,000 times. Eliza was a woman of strong Christian faith. She couldn't forgive Alexander on her own. But with God's help, with God's compassion and mercy and loving kindness, forgiveness became possible. Eliza did forgive Alexander. She was able to imagine a different future. Alexander didn't live long enough for them to rebuild their relationship as much as they might have wanted, yet Eliza spent her long widowhood freed from the prison of the past. The future she imagined was one where Alexander Hamilton was remembered not for the affair and the duels, but for writing the Federalist Papers, being first Treasury Secretary, creating a new financial system, building a new nation. A future where she, Eliza, was the custodian of Alexander's legacy. A future where she cared for children orphaned like Alexander, who might grow up to be brilliant public servants like him. Eliza couldn't have done it by herself. But once she decided to forgive, God could help her through God's compassion and mercy and loving kindness. When we decide to forgive, God will help us in just the same way. With God, forgiveness is possible as many times as it takes